right, we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you today to our third week in our Archives in Crisis series. This is an in-depth course on how to respond to rapid onset and slow occurring crises related to the archives. We thank you all for joining us today. I see a lot of new faces in the crowd, and we're really excited to have you. The Archives in Crisis series is funded by a grant from the Louisiana Board of Regents Support Fund, the Gilbo Center for Public History, the Gilbo Charitable Trust, and the Department of History at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. We want to give thanks particularly to the Light Center for allowing us to use the facilities both here in the auditorium today and out on the patio for our workshop, and also to AOC Media, who is in the back here. You are all on camera, so congratulations. We're filming the series thanks to AOC, who is posting it online on YouTube, and you'll be able to view any workshops you missed, as well as those who are unable to be with us today will be able to view the workshops after the fact. So we're really excited about this. I'd also like to thank our graduate assistants who have helped put this series together, doing everything from making the flyers to arranging our speakers as they come in and setting up equipment like the workshop equipment today. They are Summer Abukamra over here and Julia Fontenot back there. I myself am Dr. Liz Skilton in the History Department at UL Lafayette and the co-director of the Gilbo Center for Public History, along with Dr. Ian Beamish, who's right here, and Dr. Marissa Petru, who I'll introduce in just a second. I have a couple of housekeeping-related announcements before I turn things over for a land acknowledgement, as well as an introduction of our speaker. The first announcement that I have is that you can join the Wi-Fi here at the Light Center, and I'm going to give this information as slowly as possible so you all can join up. The Light Center Wi-Fi, I'm looking for it, is Light Public Wireless. And the password is lights, as in the lights above, at light, L-I-T-E. And that's all one and all undercase. But if you want to join up on the Wi-Fi, you're welcome to search the web or follow along through the presentation. In addition, you can tweet at us, follow us on social media, and that includes both Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram, which we're very excited about. So that's at UL Public History. The last thing I want to mention before I turn things over to Marissa Petru for our land acknowledgement is that we are off next week, and that's because we are hosting the Louisiana Historical Association and affiliated Phi Alpha Theta Regional Conference here in Lafayette. So if you're interested in Louisiana history, all of the best scholars that deal with Louisiana history will be either there or presenting at the conference. It happens Thursday through Saturday here in Lafayette, and I believe it's held by the interstate at a hotel. But you can look up Louisiana Historical Association and you'll be able to find it. And there are presentations all the way Thursday through Saturday. We're back the following week with our fourth week in the Archives in Crisis series, which is going to feature Jason Church from the National Park Service. Church is in the conservation program at the National Center for Preservation, Technology, and what does that say? Training, sorry. And he specializes in materials conservation. He'll be talking particularly about conservation of cemeteries, which I know we also struggle a lot with here in Louisiana due to the crises that we deal with from the environmental side of things. So that'll be really interesting. It's not next week, but it is the following week. So you can join us back here at that time. All right, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Marissa Petru. So please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much, Dr. Skilton. Thank you all for coming here. For those of you who are with us about 2 weeks ago, you know that one of the new research projects of the Center for Public History is to work on developing land acknowledgement guidelines. We're working on developing these guidelines for the university, for our department, for our center, as well as working with local institutions, organizations, museums, so that they can start implementing these guidelines as well. Something that I'm hoping to do each week that we talk about this is also update you on our research. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Linda Langley of the Coushatta Tribe, as well as Lenore Corral of the United Homa Nation for consulting with us in the last few weeks, as well as our previous speaker from 2 weeks ago, Nakai Northup of the Mashantucket, Pequot, as well as the Narragansett tribes for helping to advise us on proper acknowledgement in this region. So why is land acknowledgement important? For those of you who weren't here 2 weeks ago, it's important to acknowledge the history of settler colonialism in the United States, that we are uninvited guests on stolen land, and also to acknowledge the ongoing history and persistence of numerous hundreds of different Native American tribes in this country. So I specifically would like to acknowledge today, before we begin, that 24 different federal, state, and unrecognized tribes of the Louisiana area. I would also like to pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and future, for all of the hard work that they did to steward this land, which today makes our work possible today. So thank you very much, and I look forward to an exciting session.
Thank you all again for being here today. Our speaker is Karen Pavelka, who came all the way from Austin to be here. Karen Pavelka is a senior lecturer for preventative conservation at the School of Information at the University of Texas at Austin. Before coming to the iSchool, she was the head of Paper Conservation Laboratory at the Harry Ransom Center. She served as the Director for Education and Professional Development for the AIC from 2005 to 2011. She is a founding member for the AIC Collection Care Network and serves as a program chair. She has been deployed as a member of the National Heritage Responders, and she has been in several venues in Texas, Haiti, and Puerto Rico. She has lectured at several universities across the world, and as part of this workshop, she'll be giving us a half-hour lecture, and then we're going to head out back, and we're going to split up into groups of 2, depending on if anyone else comes in. And we'll also have lunch out there as well, so we might end up splitting into those 2 groups just to work together in a smaller group. And Karen will show us some hands-on exercises that will help us. All right, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Is this on? Is this on? Can you hear? Can you hear? Okay. There's what you can't hear. Oh, can you hear now? Okay. All right. First of all, thank you for inviting me here. I'm thrilled to be here. It's a nice excuse to get back to Louisiana, which is quite different than Texas. And it's just a nice place to be. This is a gorgeous center, and it looks like a fantastic program. Okay. Oh, okay. I've done a whole bunch of these talks, and it seems every time I'm preparing one, there's a new disaster forming. Last week, as I was putting this one together, it was the cyclones in Africa, in Mozambique, and the flooding and cyclones in the Midwest, the bomb cyclone. There's always something here, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. Sorry. It's different than my setup, and I'm a Mac person. Okay. There are, excuse me, I apologize. There. This is slightly different than the setup I'm used to, so I do apologize. These are images from the storm in the Midwest this month, and Okay. And these are images from the floods in Wimberley in May of 2015. Disasters, you know, we think of this as being the classic kind of disaster where the houses are off the foundation and the trees are through the houses and the cars are washed down the stream. But there are all sorts of disasters. Having a pipe leaking over your collection material is a disaster as well. It's just a smaller one. You need to be prepared for all of them. The Florence Flood in 1966, November 4th, 1966, was it's a really important event in conservation. It's when Florence, the Arno River, flooded its banks, and Florence, the center of much of the art world, was suddenly completely flooded. We lost a great deal of things. We recovered a great deal. People flew in from all over the world to salvage things. And that's when conservation was a pretty new field at the time, and conservators really started taking disaster response and preparedness pretty seriously. We put together a lot of workshops. There was a lot of literature that came out of that. There were laboratory designs that came out of that, all sorts of stuff. And we thought we were prepared. You know, we all went to workshops. We all did exercises, practiced. We thought we were really good at this, and we were so well prepared, and we had networked and everything. And I don't need to explain Rita and Katrina to people in Louisiana. That hit, and all of a sudden we realized we're not prepared. Conservators came down. We were staying in mobile homes down here in trailers, and we did what we could. We put together as many immediate responses as we could, but we realized that we didn't have any sort of administrative network established. We thought we did, but we didn't. Conservators tend to be really good with our hands, not so good at administration, which is why I'm a conservator. So we put together a group at that point called NHR, the National Heritage Responders. I'm a member of that group. We have about 100 members, and we're going to be doing some training, probably for another 100 members in the next year or so. If you search for National Heritage Responders, you'll come up with the website, which has a 24-hour phone number on it, which I've cleverly covered up with another slide there. Sorry. But it's pretty easy to find, and I can email it to Summer. But we're a group of people who are trained in safety procedures, response techniques, administrative guidelines, the incident command system, and we're just qualified to go in and do disaster response for objects, for buildings and objects. We all have different specializations. I'm a library and archives conservator, so most of what I do is books, paper, art on paper, photographs, manuscripts, that sort of thing. Jason, who's going to be here next time, is also a member of NHR, and in fact, he and I were in Puerto Rico together about a year ago. He's qualified to deal with buildings, with materials, certainly with grave sites. We all have different specialties, but we all work together really well. It is a 24-hour hotline. If you have a question, we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. We do send teams out sometimes, not always, but sometimes we do, but we can always give you advice over the phone if you have questions about things. And we answer a lot of questions, not only for people in institutions, but for homeowners, for the general public. We're just as interested in helping people save their family photographs as we are with institutions saving their archives. So please use us. And this image was taken in January after Katrina and Rita, so it was a good 3-4 months after the hurricanes, and the stuff I was working with there was still wet. Some of it was still dripping. But what I want you to notice from this slide is what I'm wearing. Personal protective equipment is really, really important. It's not something I have time to demonstrate completely here, but one thing you should know about is protecting what you're breathing in and gloves. You can see that in that image, I'm wearing a Tyvek suit to cover my clothing. I'm wearing gloves, I'm wearing sneakers that I can wash. I have a shower cap on my head, and I have a respirator on. There's a real difference between an actual respirator. This is an actual respirator, and it's fitted to my face, and when we go out and do a demonstration, I can show you how they work, but they do have to be professionally fitted. These are N95 masks. They're okay. They're not as good as respirators. They're okay in a pinch. And if you're going to be working with mold, at least wear one of these. And I can show you how to put them on when we go outside. There's a proper way to do it and an improper way to do it. These are pretty much useless. These are things that people use for sanding. And if you've ever used one, you notice that there's a line of dust around your face, around the mask on your face when you take it off. That's because that's where all the particles are coming in. These are completely useless. If it's the only thing that you have, then get some surgical tape and tape it to your face so there aren't any gaps. Otherwise, it's not worth using at all. And I had one lovely photo of one of my graduate students with a mask like this on, and we didn't have any surgical tape, so it's taped with lovely black electrical tape. She'll be thankful I didn't put that image up now. Okay, disasters do come in all different sizes and shapes and smells, lots of smells. It sounds counterintuitive, but the first thing you do in any disaster situation is nothing, absolutely nothing. You walk into the room and you assess the damage, because this was a perfect example of what I did wrong in a disaster response. I did go in, I looked, I got a good idea of what was there and how wet it was and how much damage had been done, how many people we needed to clean it up. There was still a foot of water outside this building. And this was after a flood in Texas a couple of years ago. And I assembled a team of graduate students and brought them into the situation, you know, so we're happily pulling stuff out, and they were doing a great job, and it started raining again. And when it started raining again, we realized that the rain was coming in through the roof, not up through the floor as we thought the damage had been. Well, what that meant, that stupidly I hadn't noticed, was that some of the timbers were rotted out. Which means the building can collapse. And I was there with a group of graduate students. The university frowns on you killing your graduate students. So we got out of there pretty quickly. They weren't hurt, and they did a really good job, and we figured out a way to do it safely. But that was, you know, that was just sheer stupidity on my part. Not the only example. So go in, assess the situation, certainly assess the safety of the situation, assess whether there's any live electricity. I've given you a handout with several websites that give you very good protocols for going in and doing assessments. So do go over those websites. Okay, where am I? There are many techniques for drying books and other materials, and how you're going to do it depends on how large the damage is, how many books, how many manuscripts you have to save, how many people you have, how much space you have, You're just, that's all part of assessing the resources. So you're going to go for the most valuable ones first and the most damaged ones first, probably, unless they're damaged beyond repair. Most stuff can be saved, at least somewhat, but I'll illustrate some of the drying techniques when we go outside. In this case, I had interleaved the book that you see in the upper left corner, and at this point I took the interleaving out. That's the interleaving you saw on the last slide, and it's all curled and dried. It's a big sort of circle. You can push it back together, and I pushed it back together and put it under a large lithostone, which weighs about 30 pounds, and left it there for 7 hours, and that's when you see how flat it had gotten at the bottom there. Ideally, I want to leave it there a lot longer than 7 hours, but I'll take what I can get. And remember that when you put it back on the shelf, it's going to be under tension again, so you're going to get more flattening that way. Again, this is all assessing your resources and deciding what's the best thing you can do for the objects in front of you. That book had been damp but not completely soaked. If your books are completely soaked, as this one is, does that work there? No, it doesn't. If your books are completely soaked, as the one in the image here is, you want to blot up some of the moisture with towels and get it to the point where it's damp, and at that point you can start interleaving it. Remember that the configuration in which you dry the book is the configuration it's going to be in for the rest of its life. If anyone wants to hear it, I can tell you about hydrogen bonding in paper. In my experience, no one wants to hear that, so I'll leave that for questions if anyone wants to know. But paper will form different bonding in different shapes as it dries. This is a book that I dried between blotters under weight so that it dried fairly flat. It was completely flat before I put it in the trunk of my car for 3 days. This is a book. It's a copy of the same pamphlet, but I crunched this one up and dried it crunched. You can feel this later when we go outside and do demos. It's gonna maintain whatever shape you give it as it's drying. So it's really, really important to dry things in the configuration you want them to be for the rest of their life. Did that make sense? Okay. And I am used to teaching graduate students. Don't hesitate to interrupt me. I don't mind at all. I'll leave time for questions at the end, but if something isn't clear as I go along, please just yell out at me or raise your hand. Okay, so that's an image of the book that I had dried from the last slide, but the one I showed you is a similar thing. If you don't have time to dry things right away, one stalling technique you can use is to freeze things. And by freezing them, we're talking about stabilizing them. If you can freeze them, you can stop the damage. You're not going to repair the damage, but you're going to just sort of forestall it for a bit. So if you're freezing books, you want to wrap them in waxed paper or freezer paper or something else that isn't going to allow them to stick to each other. Book cloth, traditional book cloth, is made of cotton and starch is essentially paste. So when they get wet, they tend to stick together, and they can bond together completely. So you do want to make sure that you wrap them in something so that you can get them apart. And then if you have a bunch of frozen books, you can take them out one at a time, let them thaw, and then dry them out as you would normally dry something out. There are large corporations who will freeze things for you, but you need to have contracted with those corporations well before the disaster happens. Okay, is everyone here from Louisiana or living in Louisiana now? If you are, you've probably seen mold, right? Because we're in the South. We have the same thing in Texas. It's just a haven for mold. The rule of thumb says that mold will start to grow after 72 hours. That's sort of true. It can grow sooner than that. I've seen it not start to grow for 2 weeks. You know, it all depends. So you do want to get things under control before 72 hours, if at all possible. The image on your right shows you some mold that had grown for about 7 days, and at that point I threw the book away. I will show you how to deal with mold outside. I've got some soot sponges here, and I'll show you techniques for taking mold off. If you're dealing with mold, do use personal protective equipment. Make sure you have a respirator or at least an N95 mask, because not all mold is toxic. We all know that. You can eat blue cheese. You can take penicillin unless you're allergic to it. Some molds are lethal. Some of them will cause you to get quite sick. Some of them can kill you in ways that are very, very unpleasant. Because we don't know what specific mold we're dealing with, we treat all of it as if it's toxic, because why not? You know, why not be overcautious when there's a danger that may or may not be there? So use a mask or respirator. Do use gloves, and it's a good idea to use goggles as well. And this is a photograph of how I'm going to show you to remove mold. We do it with something called a soot sponge, and we cut it into little slivers and take the mold off. They're very, very effective, and I have some outside that I can use to illustrate. I'm going to show you some techniques for salvaging stuff today. I can't show you everything because that's not possible. Every disaster is a little bit different. It's a matter of doing what you've learned to do and also being a little bit creative. You know, you can say, hey, that piece of paper over there can be twisted up and I can use it to raise things from the floor. There's all sorts of stuff that comes up. I'm going to show you some principles of how to approach things, and then leave it to you to keep an eye on what you're doing. I would suggest that you practice. At the School of Information, at least every year, we set up a mock disaster where we get a bunch of stuff. We get photographs and manuscripts and books and all sorts of stuff, audio cassettes, video cassettes, and we put it underwater, or sometimes we put it under motor oil if they promise me they're going to clean up the lab. We drop them from as high as we can get and smash them on the ground. We do all sorts of things to them, and then we try to salvage them. It's a great exercise. It lets you, you know, there's nothing like feeling a wet book for the first time. They're sort of slimy and heavy, and they stink, and it's really a surprise the first time you feel one. So, you know, do practice, and with discardable materials, of course, with deaccessioned materials. The stuff that I have outside is all stuff that's been deaccessioned that nobody wanted. It went through at least 4 processes. And sort of get a feel for it, because you don't want to be hit with this, with a disaster, with a whole bunch of wet books and stuff, without having any sort of idea of what you're getting into. It's really important to take breaks. If you're the one in charge and you have people working under you, make them take breaks. People will tend to be running on adrenaline, and you don't realize how tired you are. You just don't. And when you're overtired, you make silly mistakes. And again, I know this from personal experience. We had a flood once, and it was a long time ago, and I was a lot younger then, and I was working for 14 hours straight without taking a break. I think, I took maybe 2 5-minute breaks to eat something, but worked for 14 hours straight and realized at the end of it that I was sort of punch drunk. And fortunately, I didn't cause any damage, but I was really too stupid at that point to be working. I should have just sat down, taken a nap, gotten something to eat. Make the people you're working with take a break at least once an hour. Make them eat and drink something. Make them talk to each other. There's a tendency for people to go into a sort of savior pose, where I can get this done, I can do everything, and especially younger people think that they can do absolutely everything. Don't let them do that. Make them take breaks. It's also a nice bonding experience because you can talk about what's working and what's not working. Review what's going on and try to learn from it and really be supportive of each other. Especially in a major disaster, it's doubly hard because you're saving your collections. You're doing everything you can to save your collections. And in many cases, people are going home and having to save their personal collections, their house, their stuff, so there's no let up from it. And again, people in Louisiana know that already. And that's it. I want to thank Summer and Julia, whose name I didn't have when I put this together, and all the other people who are organizing this. I want to thank the members of the National Heritage Responders, because we are a team. We all support each other. You're going to adore Jason. He's wonderful. And I want to thank my husband, Red, because he shared the driving with me to come out here. And he's always my conservation technician. We refer to him as the big dumb guy, which is ironic when you meet him because he's maybe 5'9" and the skinniest person you've ever seen, but smart. So anyway, I'll leave time for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Do you have any suggestions for identifying Do you have any good suggestions for identifying the difference between dry items with old mold on them and something that's just like dirty and funky, like to know if you're dealing with mold or not?
Yes, magnification is your friend. When I have something, I put it under the microscope, but you can also put it under a loupe or a magnifying glass. If it's dirt, it's going to look like little particles. It's going to look like soot, like smudges. If it's mold, it's going to be growing out in little fibrils. It's going to look organic. If it's active mold, it's going to be sort of fluffy and maybe have things shooting off to the side. Do a search in Google Images for mold, and you'll find some lovely microscopic pictures of mold, and you'll get a sense for what it looks like. And they look completely different, but magnification really helps you identify which is which. Scott. Scott went to the School of Information where I am.
Yes, and you're an excellent professor.
I'm not a professor, I'm only a lecturer.
You told us not to say that, so I'm sorry, I forgot. So presuming that your collections have been in an archival environment for decades with some humidity and air conditioning control, and if there are cases of mold, what do you think would be the likely causes of it?
Okay, the standard answer to that is if you have a mold problem, you don't have a mold problem, you have an environment problem. If you're growing mold, you have an environment that's most likely staying above 65% for extended periods of time. It can go up and down, but if it's staying at 65 or 70 for a week, you're probably going to start to get mold. And every time it goes up to that level again, it's going to activate and start growing. There's a misconception that you can get rid of mold, and you can't. It's everywhere. Mold is ubiquitous. All you can do is control the environment. You can clean it off the surface, and I'll show you how to do that, but you're not going to get all of the mold that's embedded into the interstices of the paper. So what you need to do is talk to your engineer and figure out how you can get the RH below 65, which I know is a problem in the South. And if you can't, then can you get a desiccating wheel? Can you move those collections to a different part of the building? As long as you have them in an elevated RH situation, you're going to continue to grow mold. Sorry. Anything else?
Hi, Michael Mitchell. I work here at the library at ULL.
Cool.
Do you have any sort of common techniques that can be used just among any one institution or personal that they can keep in mind for ways to maybe not necessarily prevent, in the case of a disaster, because obviously the disaster could be huge, but just best practices that anyone could follow just in case before an emergency, so they can kind of maybe alleviate some of the problems that could arise?
Disaster preparedness?
Yes.
Yeah, there's a ton written on disaster preparedness. This is just a short presentation and exercise, so I didn't go into that, but there are several sites on the handout that I gave you that do describe disaster preparedness, and that obviously is the most important part. Anything else? All right, this is a small enough group that we can start going outside all together. I'll give you an idea of what I'm going to go over. And if you don't mind, I'm going to leave it up to you to play it by ear, decide if everyone wants to be out there together, or if you want to split up into two groups, or if you want to go back and forth, or however it feels comfortable doing it. There's some food and coffee out there, and I can repeat demonstrations as many times as you want me to. So let's go out and look at what we have set up out there. Besides, it's a gorgeous day, and play it by ear. Thank you.